Everyone read, listen, be okay. Welcome to this meeting of the Environment and Energy Board. It's a live meeting with virtual attendance as well. I'd like to say it's nice to be back. It's a very cold day, but to come to Summer Lane, but we are here for the first time in many, many months for this meeting. So welcome. Could I have any of you registered, please?
Joe, we received apologies from Councillor Kerry Murphy from Walsall, Councillor Jim O'Boyle from Coventry, and Matthew Rhodes representing Energy Capital.
Okay. Anyone else on this? If I'm not clear, is that who we've got on?
Susan.
Is that all we've got on the screen? Okay. Okay, let's get stuck in then. Any declarations of interest? I can't imagine what there are unless anybody's got a pocket hydrogen company or something they've got shares in. Received. So minutes of 7th of December, it seems a long time ago. Everybody all right with there? They've gone through the CA, I believe, so they should be okay. So we're going to get into the substantial business. Just no chair's remarks particularly, except for this meeting I did ask that we separate these items for discussion, substantive items, from more items for update, because I'm sort of conscious that in previous meetings we've been against the clock. Probably my fault for bringing too much into it, but I'm trying to sort of make it a little bit more orderly so we get the discussion with the things we want the discussion at. So the first item, item 5, Cheryl is going to give us an overview of the Combined Authority Energy Programme. Report's gone out, you've had it, and I trust you've read it. So if Cheryl would just like to give an overview, and then we can have a bit of discussion and Q&A time.
I think you have a hand up. That's the reports online.
Right.
Councillor Mahmood.
Councillor Mahmood, you want to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just going to say I was in a different Teams meeting, and Councillor Peter Hughes and Councillor Rob Clifton are in that Teams meeting. So someone needs to get hold of them to ask them to come into this Teams meeting, because I had a separate link sent to me this morning, which is for this meeting.
Right. Right. If we can sort that. Thank you so much for telling us that. Gosh. So they're coming in. You can sort that, can you?
Yeah, leave it now. Get them.
All right. Okay. So hopefully I'll join in a minute too. Back to you, Cheryl.
Just trying to get my screen up. Do I have to press anything down, or I'm plugged in? Yeah, plugged in. I will pull it out and plug it in again.
Something's happening.
Thank you very much.
Okay, hopefully that's visible on the screen as well. Off you go.
Okay, lovely. Well, thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for having me.
Put your microphone there.
Thank you very much for having me, Councillor Courts. I'm looking forward to taking you through the Energy Capital Programme. Just to highlight, this is the first time we've been in a position as the energy team to be able to respond to the needs of the Combined Authority and the local authorities of our region. Very much up until now, we've had to follow funding that's been available and opportunities that government has set. So energy is still not a devolved subject, unfortunately. But having said that, the trailblazing devolution deal that we're in the midst of negotiating, net zero and energy are up there. So hopefully we're going to see some recognition from government of the role that the Combined Authority and local authority should be playing in what is currently a very private sector driven private sector. So just to let you know, our purpose, what we are about, is making sure that the investment that comes into the West Midlands is channeled in a way that can actually achieve a just energy transition. So most of the investment comes in from the private sector. There is some public sector investment as well, but most of it comes in from the private sector, and we need to make sure that that's spent in a way that benefits our citizens and doesn't leave anybody behind through the energy transition to net zero. The other thing to highlight is that as a region, we have always looked at energy from a whole energy system perspective, so not just from an electricity or gas perspective. The Energy Capital Partnership came together back in 2017 and was a mixture of industry, academics, local authorities, our distribution network operators, all the people who have an interest in making sure that the system works effectively. So we come from that whole energy system perspective, and it makes local authorities and combined authorities an ideal place to actually consider energy, where you've got all of those aspects coming together. Just to remind you, we are responsible also for the delivery of the regional energy strategy, which is also another important aspect. And it comes very much from the perspective of cost of energy, which is something obviously that's been a key issue over the last few months, but has always been an issue for the West Midlands in terms of the cost of energy for our industry to make it competitive, but also our fuel poverty levels. Might move in a minute. Okay, so the Energy Capital Programme is divided into three key areas. The first is around energy infrastructure. Somebody wants to make a point. So the main thing from the energy infrastructure point of view is to make sure that our infrastructure facilitates a timely and cost-effective decarbonisation of our industries, our businesses, our homes and our transport systems, and supports our economic growth. So the investment that goes into our energy infrastructure is really important. What we're trying to make sure we do as Energy Capital is remove the barriers that are actually preventing investment into clean energy assets. So that means working with our distribution network operators. It means working with the private sector who are currently investing in lots of other places in the UK, which are perhaps more attractive or easier to invest in. So we need to identify what the barriers are to investment in the West Midlands and try and make sure that we're overcoming those. We've been working for a long time in what we call smart local energy systems. So that means looking at how the whole system works together and trying to make it smarter and better for our region. We don't have lots of big generation opportunities, but we do have lots of buildings, lots of a transport system that needs to decarbonise. We need to make sure that we get business opportunities and business growth as a result of investment into that smart tech. So digitalisation and the built environment is a really important part of what we're doing. The middle pillar in this diagram is about policy and positioning. As I mentioned before, energy isn't a devolved subject. It's something we don't have a great deal of control over, but one of the things we have been doing is basically proceeding until apprehended. So the government, I think, would like to see energy dealt with the same across the whole country. So they like, because they work from a national perspective, they like to see it very fair and all the same. What we've been highlighting throughout our work is that it's different in every region. The solutions are different in every region. The opportunities are different in every region. The businesses are different in every region. And we need to be able to harness the opportunities that come forward as a result of that and not have to do a one-size-fits-all national policy programme. So we've been lobbying hard for place-based energy delivery in the region. But in the meantime, we've been working with those actually in the energy sector because they're the ones that have the money. They're the ones that have the ability to make change. So we're focusing on being that partner of choice for both the private sector, the innovators, and working quite hard on the green finance element so that we can get private finance in to support these investments. So I guess the point there to highlight is that we have done really well on that. So we've got some announcements coming up soon where we will be receiving funding from Innovate UK, from Ofgem, to be able to continue to support our energy infrastructure work. And we've been really pleased with that policy and positioning piece that we've been doing, but that needs to continue. And hopefully through the Trailblazing Devolution deal, we will secure a clear route to move forward in that space. The other element is our smart hub, which I think most people are more familiar with, which is around, the objective is around reducing fuel poverty, creating warmer homes throughout the West Midlands and achieving our net zero objectives. Those things aren't always aligned, and we have to work hard to make sure that we can navigate a path that means that people do end up with warmer, healthier homes, but not higher bills. So our objective there is about working with local authorities. There is money available for social housing and domestic retrofit in the social space. So we have to work closely with our local authorities. They are the delivery partners in this area, but what we've been trying to do is provide them with additional capacity, resource and support to enable them to bring money into the region and spend it on delivery. And where there are gaps, pick up those gaps. So sometimes where there isn't capacity, when we're asked to, we've been fulfilling those gaps. We've also been working really hard with the social housing providers, and we'll continue to deliver some really large-scale programs over the coming months in relation to social housing providers. So again, the numbers are all in the report. If there's anything you want to go through later, I'd be happy to take questions. Very slow transition, apologies. Oh, and now we've gone through two. Difficult. So the programme is summarised in the paper in the slides at the back, where there's some pretty diagrams with some colours that show you all the different strands of work that we're looking at. I was asked to pick out some top priorities. This is by no means kind of all we're doing, but just some of the key things that I wanted to flag. So in terms of infrastructure and making sure that we can connect to our network, our electricity network, when we want to, and we don't have high cost barriers to getting access to electricity. In relation to working out what our transport decarbonisation programmes are, how the built environment is going to decarbonise, we need to have a mechanism that brings all that together. And at the moment, we have transport planning here, spatial planning with the local authorities here, and we have an energy planning process, which is completely separate, is in the private sector. So one of the key things we've been working with government on is the concept of local area energy planning, what that means and how we can, as the combined authority, be in a great place to convene those different parties. So our member local authorities, our transport colleagues in TFWM, and our work with the private sector energy companies who are investing in the energy infrastructure. So we'll be taking forward a programme of local area energy planning. What we are particularly focusing on is providing a digital tool for all of the decision makers. So making sure that we have something that shows you spatially, so a digital twin type model, where the energy infrastructure is, where the demand is, so what you need, and so we can identify solutions that are right for our place. Bringing all that data into one place so it can be used as evidence to help local authorities with their spatial planning processes and their funding applications, working with the various different teams to understand the energy implications of decisions that are made. So that's one of the key things that we think as a combined authority, we're in a very good place to operate. Government haven't quite agreed, but they're coming round, but hopefully we will be in a very strong position. So at the moment, this is still innovation. It's not business as usual, but we will get there one day. I've mentioned that delivering high quality retrofit solutions and technical support to member authorities and housing providers will remain a key priority. So last year we were all about getting that Smart Hub team up and running, working with the local authorities to understand where we can help and provide value. Now we are very much in delivery mode. So we have secured some large sums of money from government, and we will be making sure that we work with all of our partners to ensure that we take all the learning from those processes and we achieve high quality outcomes at the lowest cost. The third priority is around demonstrating net zero in neighbourhoods as an attractive mechanism for actually making sure that we can get investment into our communities. So I'm just going to skip through to a slide on net zero neighbourhoods. This is about coming from a community perspective, not necessarily recognizing that retrofit isn't necessarily something people want to do. It's not at the top of their priorities. They've got a lot of other things to worry about. But actually, if you come from a community perspective where you understand what the community wants to achieve, you look at how they people live within their community, you consider issues around active travel and mobility, you consider their green spaces, their access to green spaces, and their neighbourhood regeneration. You understand what that community is looking for. You can find, you can increase the level of engagement in these kind of programmes, because a lot of the government programmes in retrofit have failed because nobody's taken them up. So that's one of the key things we want to improve through this demonstration model. We also want to bring our supply chain with us. So again, government thinks that the supply chain for a retrofit is a national thing. It's not. It's very much about local installers and whether they are available to actually respond. So we need to give that supply chain a bit of confidence. So we're trying to get to a point where we have some demonstrators where there's a programme of them, there's a cohort. We are making a commitment to bring money in to make sure that these go ahead, but they can start to see what that programme of activity looks like on a long-term basis and understand whether it's worthwhile them investing, because too many government schemes up until now have been in that sort of boom bust cycle and meant that it's not worth local businesses investing. And finally, we've got a big focus on funding and finance. So this is where there's still a lot of innovation going on, but we're trying to work out how we can get a model that is attractive to the private sector to invest, because actually we'll get a very small amount of money from government. I think if I skip to the slide on retrofit delivery, the first programme, it's 620 homes. That's not what we need. We need to get to, as a region, 294,000 in the first 5 years. So we need private finance to be able to do that. But at the moment, it's risky. Private finance would much prefer to go into a big offshore wind turbine than it would into multiple different energy efficiency and small measures on people's properties in an urban environment. So we need to have a mechanism that enables us to reduce the risk for those investors, make it more attractive. And in doing that, we hope through the Net Zero Neighbourhood Programme, we will have a much better ability to attract money into the region. So those are the three elements that we're working through with that. The first part of the investment was 1.65 million, which was committed by the Combined Authority as the demonstrator. That's going into Brockmore and Dudley, but we are working with a cohort of other communities across each of the local authorities, and we will make a commitment to secure investment for them as well as we go forward. So just skipping back to the last one about lobbying government, Ofgem and National Grid to empower the West Midlands to continue to influence the energy system. So this is a bit like weasel words, but it goes back to my point about the fact that we don't actually have any powers in this space. So we have to make people want to work with us. Today, there is an announcement being made by Ofgem on, they are consulting on the role of local within the future energy system. So looking at local governance. Energy Capital, right from day one, has been positioning, saying we need to have some say over how Ofgem makes decisions about investment of its distribution network operators across the regions. And at the moment, we have no say. They consult our local authorities. If there's rubbish that goes into the consultation process, it's rubbish that comes out. We need to really make sure that those relationships are strong and we are empowered. So our regional energy systems operator project, some of you may have heard, which was an innovation project we did a few years ago. That piece of work has totally informed what Ofgem are doing in this space. We had the privilege of providing all of our evidence from that project into their early consultation process, and now we are going to be working with them to try and show them that we know how this should work, and we'll be a voice of the region, a voice of local, that is perhaps countering some of the national voices that says, no, this should be a one-size-fits-all solution going forward. So that remains a really important priority from our point of view. And our strong relationship with National Grid electricity distribution is really key to this in terms of making sure that our voices are heard. So there's a couple of slides just to show you what local energy plan might look like, the figures around our investment programme in net zero in retrofit. We are pleased that we've recently secured the Home Upgrade Grant Wave 2 funding. It's another 13 million. So we're very excited about that. And we are still waiting on the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund Wave 2 programme results. So I think that was probably all I wanted to say, really, just to highlight with this slide that this is government's kind of current thinking. They are putting, so Ofgem's current thinking, they are putting more information out today about what that regional system planner and operator might be. I think we may have won the argument that we should be involved in the planning of the energy system, but we perhaps haven't won the argument that we should be involved in the operation of the system. And that's where things like flexibility markets come into their own, where we have opportunities for businesses in our region. A spin out of Aston University, Graduate works specifically in this space. We want to be able to support those innovators, and we need a model in the future that actually enables that. So that's where we are on that. I will stop there and take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. And Andy wants to come in, but before he does, I just want to make some points of my own. And you know, clearly we know what the overall objective is. We know what the problem is out there and what we're trying to fix. As so often with the climate change agenda, it's the how, it's the where, it's the delivery. Now, one thing I would like to see changed in that presentation is the reference to the supply chain. Not there's anything wrong with the supply chain, it's the narrative that relates to that. And if I could just explain that, there's a, I'm from the building industry, and you've heard me say this before, retrofitting housing isn't just about boilers, it's not just about insulation, it's about a whole collection of other how do you do it, and actually how do you deal with people. For instance, someone gave me a statistic the other day, but I've forgotten what it is, but I think it's something like 2/3 or 3/4 of the houses that need retrofitting are actually private houses. So, the skill is not just being able to fit a boiler, it's to actually get the finance. It's even in some ways not even that, it's actually telling people why should I have the disruption, particularly if they're like me, elderly, and don't like interference with their lives. So there's also a management perspective of how you deliver these things, which takes me to my second point, is the climate change agenda. What we are missing, not we actually, what is being missed is the how do we deliver at scale? Well, first of all, how do we find out what works? Which of course is what the whole retrofit pilot is all about. What works, how do we deliver it at scale? And what is the best value for the pound, the limited pound in how you do that. So, and I want this emphasis, as far as I'm concerned, and Andy knows this in Solid, I keep going back and saying, well, how are you delivering those common, because it'll be common to everything in the climate change problem. Scale, deliver what is best value. And the final point is, I think you're missing a really big point here with the reference to supply chain, in the reference to supply chain. And I think it's a human element of that supply chain. And it's things like apprenticeships. And it's particularly, there is the potential for job creation and bringing people is enormous. But your typical small business, and you made the point very validly earlier on, is local solutions everywhere. And even if you've got the same sort of solutions, they're different, because it's a B company, small company in one area, and CD in another, but they both have the same characteristics. They want stability of funding to be able to invest in employees. That's a really important thing for jobs and growth, and particularly in places like East Birmingham and North Solihull. The areas there where we're trying to get young people into jobs. So I think there's three main points there that if you could, it's not a question, it's a statement, to be honest. Hopefully you'll like the statements. So I've got Andy, and then I've got probably Councillor Mahmood, but it just says, okay, Andy first.
Yeah, just to follow on, I work with small business. I'm a small business myself, and I think there's a reluctance to hire people. They've been burnt too many times. So I think maybe the role for the CA would be an employment agency where we rent staff to small business. Because they just don't want to risk of managing people. People don't turn up, people who grunt, people who walk away to another business. I think that may be a way out, where we become the trainer, the agency where we let people
Really
out. Might be sort of a way around that. That's the barrier. It's a barrier that they're just scared of taking people on. They want to take people on. They want to expand their business. It's just too much faff and too much risk. But when I was talking, still one point, I agree with most with everything you so broadly say, it's the energy companies and it's the grid is fundamental to everything we do here. Because what we would like to do is to put solar panels on a roof somewhere in one part of our area and then transmit that electricity to put it to somewhere where we need it. We can't do that because you know, and I've worked, you know, 39 years in industry, and the energy sector is Luddite. It's sort of very, very risk adverse, far too risk adverse than anybody. I work in the chemical industry. We deal with things that can actually kill you. They just, yeah, that sector boils water and transmit energy. That's all they do is boil water, for God's sake. It's not that risky. But it's the culture that's been built up over centuries that we've got to break down. We've got to persuade them and deregulate a little bit more as well. Because whenever anyone wants to do anything with the grid, like make a connection, it's mountains of paperwork. Unnecessary. You know, it's really unnecessary. So we need to do that. You know, if I generate 6 kilowatts of solar, I'm okay, I can do that. But the grid takes it for nothing. They want to charge me for taking it, but they can't do that, thankfully. But if I generate more than 6 kilowatts, I then become a supplier, and then I've got to go through all the paperwork, and that's ridiculous. So we need, so I do support you. We do need, that's the fundamental to moving net zero, is getting the energy grid to be deregulated, be friendlier, and be a bit more innovative in how they think, rather than putting barriers every time you do something. There's a barrier. They worry about phasing. They worry about, I think they probably confuse the civil servants in Ofgem and everything else about all their phasing and all that. But really, you know, really, if you're in a war, you wouldn't worry about phasing. You just do it.
That's a great point, and I'm hoping that the local energy planning process that we're going to go through will bring all of those conversations out. There are some innovators, you're right, they're a completely different department to the people who actually manage and do, and we need to start to bring those together to break down those regulatory.
You've got jobs for us. I think we need to hire electrical engineers, high tension electrical engineers, who can actually talk to them and just tell them what to do. Because the problem with that sector is the people who know how to run electricity generation have left, become consultants, have retired, and they've got people who haven't got the training and they rely on the paperwork. So we do need to give them the expertise.
We do need to challenge back, and that's hopefully again something the combined authority is in a good place to do to support all the local authorities when they're having those conversations.
One of the things, and taking this in a general context, I'll put my microphone on even if no one else is.
On you pressed your button and it came off.
Is barriers to barriers to climate change action, but barriers to some of the individual. I mean, I know he's mentioned one in terms of employment, whatever. But I just think as a general, that I like this as a concept. You know, what's the obstacles to you do certain things? Because if we examine those obstacles, sometimes we know we can. Councillor Mahmood.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm broadly supportive of the approach being adopted and I know the progress. Just quick fire 3 questions. If you refer to 2.2.4 of the report, just want to know if we have a backup plan for the delivery of the 3rd phase if the funding application to Ofgem is not successful. And secondly, 2.3.1, same question in relation to the consortium bid for SHDF Wave 2. And finally, in and around the retrofit, there was some talk about during the presentation about trying to encourage private finance. Do we know of any other regions that have gone down that route? And if they have, is there any lessons learned from what they've done around financing, you know, private financing for the retrofitting of properties? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I take those back in the backward order? I'll take those in the backward order. I can remember the first one. You might have to refer me back to the numbers, please, if you don't mind, Councillor. So in relation to the finance, yes, there's been some national work going on to look at models that work, models that don't. And we've been working closely to understand that. We've actually got a secondee into our programme from the private sector who's been working on those national programmes to give us the insights and the learning from elsewhere. Nobody's got it right yet, but we're close. And that's why it's still sort of in the innovation space. But yeah, we are making sure that we draw in lessons from elsewhere. Can you take me back to the references? Sorry, I didn't have my report in front of me, which I should have done.
Yes. Yeah, for the first one is the 3rd phase of funding application to Ofgem in 2.2.4, and the second one is 2.3.1. in relation to the consortium bid for SHDF. Just worried in case we're not successful in both bids if we have a backup plan.
Okay, so in relation to 2.2.4, if I could ask for this not to be minuted, we have been successful in securing the Ofgem funding, but it's under embargo currently, so we're not able to announce that. It is a bit of a iterative process. Just keep it amongst ourselves, she says, as it's being broadcast. Yeah. So that money we will be working with National Grid electricity distribution on that programme. It is an iterative process, so we don't secure all the money in one go. You have to phase it, but once you're in, we're in a very, very strong position. In relation to the SHDF funding, that's still not yet to be announced. You're absolutely right. We have to plan for what else we would do. We have secured the home upgrade grant funding, which means that the team as they stand would be able to continue to deliver their work and provide the market development support to the partner local authorities. But hopefully, even if the combined authority wasn't to secure large sums of money in that space, we will still have local authority partners who are successful in those funding applications, and we'll be able to work closely with them to learn lessons and improve deliveries.
Okay, Peter? Councillor Peter Hughes.
Yes, sorry about that. A few things really. I did notice you saying that you would support local officers with expertise, and I think that's a really important thing for Samuel. I would like to think that we could increase that level of support and expertise, particularly around the retrofit situation. I think, you know, we seem to be going in the slipstream of the Three Cities programme in a way that, and we're lagging behind, and we need a bit of support, I think, in bringing us up to speed on that.
Sorry, Peter, you're saying we're behind Three Cities. What is the Three Cities programme delivering at the moment?
Well, I don't know what it's delivering, but I know for certainly they are developing. Their intentions are to develop, you know, a more wider scale retrofit program and sort of take the lead on it. But that you know, that means that others in other local authorities, we're not necessarily getting the benefits of their increased sort of buying power, not knowledge, but, you know, everything that goes with Three Cities combining together to actually achieve something. I think that in terms of the retrofit situation, the information that I'm getting fed back to me is the Devo deal isn't necessarily going to be the panacea in terms of funding for retrofit, but whether that information that I've been given is wrong, I don't know. Moving on, I agree in terms of businesses in particular. I think the government should be looking at providing some incentives, particularly to smaller businesses, to actually install solar panels on roofs and what have you. I think anything we can do with the industry in the Black Country to try and bring down energy costs would be, well, it's essential, effectively. The other thing that concerns me is that I'm aware that in my own backyard, I'm a councillor for Wednesbury. We have a sustainable energy centre there, Kew. I'm sure officers will probably be aware of it, but it's a green energy supplier. It was the UK's first municipal waste gasification plant, and it's, how can I say, going leaps and bounds into doing very innovative stuff with carbon capture and hydrogen purification. Now, I'm going to make a very simple point here. there's a lot of excess heat that is generated through that particular business. The person that set this on the rail, so to speak, is a local businessman, and he always wanted that any such centre would actually benefit the locality. And I so much so that I was inclined, when we built the new Wednesbury Leisure Centre, for instance, which is probably less than half a mile away from this plant. I asked that when they installed the boiler, that the boiler had something on it that could take connection from this plant. Now the problem is, where do we get the money to put any infrastructure there? This plant could probably provide heat not only to the leisure centre, but quite a lot of other buildings in the area. There's a primary school. There are municipal buildings in the area. There's a local Morrison's supermarket not too far away. A fire station, a new medical centre. I'm just, are you able to assist us as a council to lever in investment to try and make this happen? It can be done on a small scale, and it could be used as an exemplar for doing elsewhere, like you're doing with the Dudley idea with the retrofit model. Why don't we take this particular example and use it as an exemplar for use anywhere else? By the way, these plants are modular, and that they've been built in such a way they're small, and the intention is that they can be replicated throughout the country, and obviously throughout the Combined Authority area. So let's please look at something which is happening in our backyard, where science is being, the science of what we're talking about is being developed at a high level. And can we basically try and look for resources to see the benefits for local people of installing these plants? It's only by doing these things that you actually take a step forward. I've said a lot there. I would actually, at some stage, I know we have these meetings sometimes in other locations. I would actually think Q would possibly be happy to invite the board to visit that plant and have a meeting there if necessary. It would allow you to see what's going on, and it would, it fits very well into this board work. Sorry, I've rambled on, but
No, it's all right. You've got several points there in relation to the last bit. I think we agreed, and I think you've already offered to host a meeting in the future, and I'm sure we'll pick that up, because the whole, I mean, I'd rather be on the ground and see what's going on in individual areas than sit here myself. So we'll pick that point up. Look, several points you've raised, some of which I'm going to back to Cheryl. I just want to challenge this thing about three cities. The team here that Cheryl, Jackie have delivering retrofit. They're also setting up examples, because as we talked about earlier on, this needs scale. And, I mean, lots of local authorities are doing retrofit, but, what we are trying to do, we're not trying, we are demonstrating to government that we're taking steps to try and do best practice. And we're always ready to receive best practice. And, the more we can collaborate across the CA, the better. And that's what, well, I'm not clear what, frankly, why three cities aren't in this, but let's move on. Second, Devo deal, I suspect all of that is sub judice, so I'm not going to comment on that. I'm sure it will be a triumph for the region, but we'll see. And then we've got incentives to business to install. Totally agree. This is so important that we try and encourage and incentivize small business to do it. And I know in my own GBS LEP that we gave quite a number. There's a program, and someone will bail me out in a minute and tell me what it is. but there is a very good program of green, not green grants, but of grants from the LEP to help small business tackle these issues, because everybody knows about climate change, but frankly, small business doesn't always have the means and wherewithal, meaning technology, to deal with it. So we need that encourage, and that's what Cheryl do. And then I really am going to pass over to stay on Sustainable Energy Centre. It all sounds good stuff, but Cheryl, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Potts. Yes, thanks for all your points, Councillor Heath. They're very relevant. In relation to the trailblazing devolution deal, we are still in negotiations. It might not be the panacea, but we're moving forward. The message has been heard. We'll see what the outcomes are. But we have backup plans. We have ways of delivering. It's just that it takes a lot. It's a lot higher cost to the region in the way that we're currently having to do it. In relation to the investment into your waste gasification plant, absolutely. So we'd love to work really closely on that. Kate works with lots of local authorities on these sorts of opportunities. There is funding potentially through the Heat Network Delivery Unit. There is also interest from strategic partners in the private sector who would be interested in building some of that infrastructure if they get to own it. So we'll see, but there's definitely something we can do there. And yeah, my colleague will gladly pick it.
That's brilliant.
On the small business support, I think the deal might also come up with some outcomes in that space as well that might be relevant to the Black Country. So yeah, watch this space, but yeah, really look forward to working with you.
Okay, other speakers, we're roaring away with the time now, so need to probably hurry up a bit. Rob, I think, is that Rob?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah, over to you, Rob.
Right, a bit of a scattergun approach here to everything that's been discussed. I'm going to go quick because you just mentioned time. In response to what Peter Hughes is saying from Sandwell there about their retrofitting turbos to pump in energy to local neighbourhoods, hospitals, etc. Dudley's going to be facing the same sort of situation with its energy from waste project that he's bringing forward. We've just moved massive leaps and bounds on that. We've just gone through a new contract, and one of the issues that we have with the plant, the energy from waste at Dudley, it's an old plant, and we recently had a visit round there. In fact, it was on Friday, and I was discussing to the technicians there about the excessive heat energy, and they're saying, okay, one of the best things that we could probably do here is when it's time to fit a new turbine is to then think about putting a tap on that turbine so we can pump the energy into the local neighborhood, hospitals, or even into industry. And that's a good mechanism then of using waste from around the area and turning it into something positive that local residents, local business can benefit from. But it's going to be an expensive process. So then when you're looking at the budget to doing it, you know, it would be beneficial that we do get some help with the budget to actually fit the actual turbine that will enable us to do this, and then pump out the energy, the delivery mechanisms of pumping out the energy. So some fun for that. The other thing I just want to say very quickly relating to the retrofitting, it's one of the big issues that we first must face is it's okay saying we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do the other. We should be start first by saying, how are we going to do it? What's going to enable us to do all these things that we want to do? Right. So I think we need a massive, and there probably is, and I might not be aware of it, a massive outreach into education. Right. I think we need to be linking up with colleges. I'm an ex-lecturer from University College Birmingham, which is basically, you could probably throw a paper aeroplane from where you're sat now and maybe hit it if the wind's in the right direction to UCB. And I know that they have just started to open up this building institution, which I don't know too much about. But, you know, we should be reaching out to these places and saying, okay, one of the first things that you guys should be focusing on is filling the gap of shortage of labour for young technicians, and not just young technicians, right? Everything's focused on the young, but there's plenty of people wanting career changes in the 40s and in the 50s. And we shouldn't view training people in the 40s and the 50s, or even a bit later, as being too old to be economically viable long term. Right, they're economically viable now. People's work life experience is totally changing. The retirement age is totally changing, right? People are fitter longer. So, you know, when somebody's 40, you got 40, 50, 60, you got 30, another 30 years before they're probably going to hit retirement. So there is a benefit in just in focusing on an even age group rather than focusing on the young people as well, right? So we need to get colleges set up. We need them to focus on specific things. My last point that I'm going to make here is, quite rightly said, 2/3 of the retrofitting, you know, we could come through private housing. So you know, my role as climate change officer for Dudley Council, I thought, okay, you know, I live in a terraced house, right, surrounded by a terraced house. So I looked at the government system and the government websites, and first thing I've realised I need is I've got to renew my certificate for my house. So it's all about public awareness. So first of all, I've got to renew my certificate. However, once I've renewed that, I then have to choose, do I have my external walls cladded? And I live in sort of like in a historic area. So that's going to be detrimental to the environment historically. So what I need is a mixed approach. However, when I look at all the paperwork, look at all the forms, I can apply for one. I can either apply for my external walls, or I can apply for my internal walls. And I can't, and I can apply for a flat roof fix. I can't apply for all of them for the grant, right? You're limited to one choice.
Okay.
When in reality, what's going to put a lot of people off in actually going forward on this is if they hit that barrier, which one do we go for? Oh, it's not worth it, right? So we need a more realistic option choice for people, and we need basically what I think is really needed is comms. We need raising. We need to be telling people about, you know, in the private sector, you can apply for these grants. This is what it's going to enable you to happen. But we don't want to be raising expectations if we haven't got the people to deliver when they're putting their applications in. They say, oh, you've got to wait 16 months.
Yeah, okay. I mean, pick up those points, Rob. Time's roaring on now. But just let me just answer one point. You talked about, you know, young people and the need for skills and the rest of it. And I referred in the the Combined Authority Full Council to the apprenticeship show that we held. I mean, Solihull Council organised it in North Solihull. And we've done them in central Solihull. I set the thing up several years ago. The place was packed. We had over 1,000 people, not just from North Solihull. They came from Birmingham, from Warwickshire. And it was an example of how to outreach, because we had representatives there from quite a number of colleges, quite a lot of businesses, you know, big stuff like HS2, JLR as well, but quite a lot of you know, builders, and it was really effective. And do you know what? The amount it cost was not that much. And I would recommend that this sort of model be taken on more widely in the West Midlands. So I mean, there's an example. You also make other points about barriers, and that's why I said earlier, it's understanding the barriers to people doing it. And you've just given a great example of some of them. I really want to move on if I can, because we've got Suzanne from the Environment Agency. I'm not sure what the castle is in the background. I think I know what it is, and I would say Bob was probably going to be a little bit upset about that, but I'll leave him to. Right, Rob,
Three words. Can you get the deans of these colleges and have a meeting with the deans, please, and just emphasise they need to get these training programs up?
We will investigate. I don't know.
I'll talk to our skills team. We were talking really closely with the skills team as to what the right approach is. Energy Capital won't necessarily be able to do that, but we will be able to support from a technical point of view whatever the approach the skills team can take. But yes, I will go and take that action away. In terms of your Dudley point, Kate's talking to them already, but local energy planning is the thing we need to identify those in all the areas and how we can match demand and supply together. So that's really important. So yeah, and the restrictions to government funding, I completely agree, which is why we want a regional approach.
Suzanne from Warwick.
Right. Sorry, I've got Warwick Castle in the background today because I've been dealing with Warwick this morning. Yeah, I'll keep it really quick. it's around the local generation. I mean, I think really whatever we do, we can't forget the other environmental impacts that even local generation can have. But also you talk about barriers or issues. Innovation often requires permits. Permits take time. Innovation takes time to be actually assessed for its environmental impacts. Depending on the size, you do need permitting around that sort of thing. So that bigger, broader conversation around the plans would be really important. And I'd also say linking into what other strategies are happening. Waste strategy is all about not creating waste, putting it back in. So it isn't all about having it there to burn in terms of that. And not every piece of waste is actually suitable to be waste. It doesn't have the calorific value that you want to do. So you can't assume that you can multiply lots of little incinerators around countries. It's not feasible. So I think having that, bringing those conversations around the other strategies together to how they work together is really important going forward.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Are we, thank you. That's a great discussion. I think you got a lot there to take back, Cheryl. So if I may, let's move on. I mean, it's all a good discussion. I think some good action points come from it. Next, therefore, we're going to go to another aspect of energy, which is hydrogen. And Kate Ashworth is now going to take us through the the position paper on hydrogen now. So over to you, Kate.
Thank you, Councillor Courts. So this is the West Midlands hydrogen position paper, which the need for it has come from a recognition that in order to meet our 2041 target, we are going to have to consider the role of hydrogen in that energy transition. But what does that mean for the West Midlands, which is a region unique from the rest of the country? We need to understand specifically what our role is what our role is within that emerging hydrogen economy, which is a really exciting space. There's lots of activity happening here. We need to know what the right things to do for us are. The other thing that we need to be aware of is that as a region, in terms of our natural assets, as we don't have immediate access to some of the natural resources, such as the sufficiency of things like offshore wind, for example, that could produce very, very high quantities of green hydrogen, which is absolutely where we need to be headed. We need to understand actually what our USP is in the region, and actually what our what resources can we offer? What role can we play in this emerging hydrogen economy? So on that basis, and recognising that we needed specific technical expertise, we have commissioned a West Midlands hydrogen position paper, and we have brought on board for a very competitive public procurement exercise a consortium of Cenex, who has specific expertise in the transport space, recognising that this could be a really interesting application for hydrogen, but also WSP, who have renowned expertise in both kind of in net zero pathways and particularly in the industrial applications. So we tasked them with producing a hydrogen policy position paper that provides independent and objective view specifically on the role of the West Midlands to play in this emerging hydrogen economy. And the really important thing that they have undertaken is a very comprehensive stakeholder exercise where they have gone to speak to a lot of the existing proponents of, who may be interested in the hydrogen space, but also other large entities that would be interested in providing investment in the region, and really understanding what that, that potential opportunity might be. There is a wide evidence base that is used to support this. There's obviously a national hydrogen strategy. I say obviously, nothing is obvious in this space, but there is a national hydrogen strategy which sets the scene in terms of level of ambition for the UK in terms of adopting hydrogen. And there is also a number of regional strategies that have emerged. It's a very interconnected space, so you cannot necessarily think about one particular application. It's a very cross-cutting issue. We've recognised this internally. We've set up an internal hydrogen working group that consists of energy capital, but also transport for West Midlands, also our skills department. So really kind of, and the Mayor's office, recognising this is also a political issue. So really trying to bring together that cross-cutting elements to ensure that we're well positioned in this space. So the conclusions of the independent and objective report are that actually hydrogen will play an important role in the West Midlands. It's small in comparison with electrification, which is our primary decarbonisation route, but actually that element is still going to be very important in terms of understanding that this is a new development, and we need to understand what that looks like. The specific demands that the report recognised in there was around long-range transport, and this very much is echoed within our infrastructure for zero-emission vehicle strategy, recognising that as in the centre of the country, we are going to have to support a wide range of transportation options through there. And what we do not want to do is be a blocker to a range of different options. There are also going to be some hard to abate industrial processes that we're going to have to work out exactly how we are going to make sure that those companies aren't disadvantaged by not being able to electrify some of their processes. And there are some very high heat processes which really require hydrogen. And there is also some potential building heating requirements as well. So that's essentially what this graph is telling us. And my proposal now is that we do look at individual applications in that space, and then we bring them together to see what that looks like in the round. So in terms of the recommendations from the report, and it's a very complex landscape, so these are very high level recommendations. I'm very happy to take questions on how this all kind of fits together. But in terms of the headlines then, in terms of transport, essentially what the report tells us is that we're doing the right things in terms of the Zebra programme, for example, which is it's a nationally leading programme in terms of the number of hydrogen buses. 124 is on the table at the moment. In terms of then using that innovation programme to really understand the feasibility for some of the other transportation routes that might need to then transition to hydrogen in the future. And the other thing that the report tells us is actually that the access to the hydrogen infrastructure for other transport modes is very important. So how we set up those projects, how we enable access in an open way to make sure that we make the most of those projects is going to be really, really important. In terms of our industry, we don't have, in terms of industrial clusters, we don't have these very, very large single entity industrial kind of monoliths that other areas might do. What we have is a distribution of a huge heartland of small, medium enterprises that will rely on primarily electrification, but there will be a role for hydrogen to play in that space. So essentially the role for the CA in that is to ensure that those businesses, again, aren't disadvantaged, that we are working at how to aggregate that demand together and show it to be attractive to investment to ensure that that hydrogen is available to those businesses. And then lastly, in terms of the individual applications, we're thinking about kind of heating for building, which is a really knotty issue. We know that this is going to be really, really challenging. What the report is telling us is essentially that there is a least regret option at the moment, which is what we are already undertaking in our Smart Hub, which is about making sure that the buildings that we have are as energy efficient as they possibly can be. And then there is an electrification primary pathway, but then some hydrogen might be required for those really, again, hard to abate, those properties that aren't going to be suitable for electrification. This is subject to the national pathway, though. There are safety trials ongoing at the moment for which we will need to take those lessons learned to really understand what that means in terms of our, particularly the domestic requirements for those. But the consultants have recommended that we essentially work to incorporate those learnings as they come through, and we make sure that we are building those into our ongoing programmes. So that I've taken you through the kind of individual kind of high level applications that were kind of really highlighted as potential opportunities. It is important to recognise, as this come back to the hydrogen as a real kind of cross-cutting issues, and actually we cannot consider no silos when it comes to thinking about the supply side of things. We are, if we are looking to say potentially attract investment through a pipeline through our region, or potentially through hydrogen hubs, then we're going to need to think about a number of different applications, and there is a role for the CA to play there in terms of convening that demand together and really putting forward you know, what is an attractive investable proposition to those potential investors. So in terms of the roles then, what the consultants have been telling us is that there is a strong role for the skills piece in this, because what's really important to recognise is there is an emerging hydrogen economy. We have a fantastic advanced manufacturing skills base already. This would be a really ripe area for them to be thinking about transitioning into some of those emerging market developments. And the CA is well placed to be able to support that. So coming back to all the discussions that we've had already around kind of apprenticeship programs, about working with academia, about you know, retraining and reskilling, this is a really ripe area that we should be investing time into. There is also a role for us to play around awareness raising for market development, so understanding what investment opportunities are there, and particularly thinking about matching hydrogen supply and demand. So really trying to bring together a range of different demands into our region, really getting to the bottom and into the detail of that, so that we can come up with making sure that we show ourselves to be a really attractive region for investment in that space. It is important for us to understand the uncertainties and complexities around hydrogen for heat, and making sure that we put ourselves right at the forefront of understanding and knowledge in that space, so we can embed those into our existing programs. And then in terms of inward investment, making sure we're working with a growth company and bringing companies in and working with existing companies that really want to make the most of this emerging opportunity. I think that's all I wanted to present.
Okay, well, Andy wants to ask some questions. I've got a few bits that I want to raise. One is a sort of a more specific question about hydrogen. Then I want to go on to the broader issues. And this results from a question. I mean, I went to Cranfield University a few months ago now, I suppose it was, and you know, I heard the work that they were doing in terms of producing hydrogen, but it, you know, what struck home to me all the time is a fundamental question of how do you make, you know, so what you're saying, how do you make hydrogen and distribute it in a way that doesn't generate more energy than you started with? And one of the questions was, and a separate question I was put was the renewables. You know, there's loads of energy being generated by renewables at the moment, and yet there's a vast amount of it is wasted. You know, where the capacity is to convert that wasted renewable, you know, it's simple. People sleep at night and they don't use their TVs or whatever it is. How can you harness that energy? I mean, one example would be to pump it into hydrogen production, which then gives you a currency to use it elsewhere. Now, I don't hear this much talked about, so I'm putting that question to you. That's the first point about the feasibility of that. The second is you've got an amazing database there that you put together, which I think is really is going to help us as a region. But what I think we need to be satisfied is in terms of the opportunities for the region, how we're going to be able to maximise these, because I don't think either the tech or the methodology is there yet, you know, in a number of ways. There's lots of people doing lots of things, but they don't really know quite what will work. I mean, you've picked a couple of examples because we instantly think of transport and the, you know, I go even on the railways, you know, you go into the, and it's diesel and stuff like that. I mean, that, okay, you can electrify that because you have a line, but trucks is more difficult. It really is, and yet hydrogen is an obvious solution, but you got to ship it around. I mean, pipelines, can we wait that long? I mean, how much? I just think it's tricky. And because heating, domestic heating is another one. I mean, if they crack the mini sort of generator, you know, means of getting a good, I think it has a really viable alternative to heat pumps. And I don't run with this. We're gonna, there's one solution for domestic or any other form of heating. I think we need to try lots of, you know, different techniques, and then one will work, and then that will take the lead. It's just we need to make sure we're backing as many horses as possible. I think, and making sure our USPs as a region come out in the fore, so that, because it's private money that's going to make this work. It's and we need to be there in the forefront. I know Andy Street will be doing that to promote the region. So that's my bundle of question. Do you want to take that? Possibly you deal with those, then I'll bring Andy in. I'll see we've got Catherine Mahmood also.
Okay, well, thank you for those. I'll take them in turn. So hydrogen is a storage mechanism for excess renewables, I think was your first point. I think absolutely, you know, that is it's a really strong role for hydrogen to play in that space. The majority of excess renewables will be from offshore wind and large solar. So you're absolutely right in terms of profiling of those. We don't have a huge sufficiency of those in the West Midlands, but we do have ambitions to definitely roll out a lot of the kind of larger scale as and when, as soon, you know, as we can, given our kind of where the land constraints essentially.
Could you have mini? I mean, we think about it on large scale, but you know, we have a lot of industry in the West Midlands, a lot of energy that's generated, and I know I sort of heard that there are pockets of excess energy in the Midlands. I just wondered whether on a local scale this could be a possibility.
Yeah. The question is which is the most economic at the moment, whether you would use it in batteries, use battery storage, or you would convert to hydrogen, and that's a place, an individual solution in each of those areas, but it's definitely an option. Yes.
Okay, then on your second point around technical uncertainties, and we don't necessarily know the emerging, the dominant route for a lot of these kind of decarbonisation pathways, and you picked out HGV as a particular area where we don't, it's a bit of a kind of VHS Betamax situation at the moment, and we have, you know, we're trying to essentially work out what is the least regrets option, and one real advantage is that we think that grid connections and securing really large grid connections is the least regret options, because ultimately then if you're going large battery trucks, you have the charging facilities there. If you are going hydrogen, you can then have on-site electrolysis to make, you know, and then you'll be producing ultimately greener hydrogen because the national grid will be decarbonised. So essentially making sure we have sufficient high value grid connections will allow us that flexibility and future proofing that we're going to need to take, you know, to take those to.
So electricity is the currency. Factory, it might be hydrogen, it might be other things. Got it. Yeah.
Okay. So we leave our options open on that essentially. And then coming back to your final point around decarbonisation of heating for homes, it's very similar. So we need to be doing the right things to leave ourselves open to as many different solutions as possible as the technologies develop. So I absolutely think you're right in that respect. There is not going to be one solution that works for all homes. We know, you know, our housing stock is hugely diverse. So, you know, making sure that we put ourselves in the best possible position to adopt the lowest cost decarbonisation route is going to be really important.
Okay, got it. So it's Andy, then I think Majid, then Peter. Okay, Andy first.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with the paper, but I'm a chemical engineer, so I started on the back of my envelope doing a thermodynamic review of this and the properties of hydrogen. I think that's disappointing that these consultants did not talk about the chemistry, because that's so fundamental. You know, you can do all the research papers like my opposition do, but it's down to fundamentals. Now, thermodynamically, the Carnot cycle, which is what a heat pump operates at, takes ambient heat and raises it in temperature to another heat, which can do that. So the efficiency of that electricity is about, let's say, 3.6. So for every kilowatt of electricity you put in, you get 3.6 out. Now, thermodynamics have changed. Unfortunately, first law says energy cannot be destroyed or created, but the second law says you have entropy, which means it's in your process. Every time you do a change or a move, you lose efficiency. So you create electricity, then you're going to create hydrogen, and then you're going to create heat. So that efficiency is about 0.6. So you're down to, for each kilowatt of energy, a heat pump will produce 6 times more heat than hydrogen. So that's not really good for domestic heating or anything else. Now, hydrogen is a small molecule. It's about 8 times smaller than methane, which is the constituent of natural gas. So that means, one, it leaks more readily. And studies by my brethren have said that the risk of putting hydrogen into the grid will quadruple the amount of deaths in the country. So you do need to increase your safety level. Now, I would never trust, with the greatest respect, hydrogen in a domestic house from a process safety point of view. It just, and plumbers to deal with it. You just can't do that. It's a different level. So for domestic heating, it's a non-starter, never will be. And you're far better off running a big cable than running a hydrogen pipe to someone else. And there's also infrastructure. So the smallest of hydrogen has one great advantage. You put a lot in a small space. So you can compress it about 500 bar quite safely. So therefore, what is its function? The functionality is purely as storage and use. So basically, if you have, and it also helps in the train business. So if you have a hybrid hydrogen stroke electric train, it means that electric train can go off the electric wires and go into areas which are not electrified and then link in back again. So I think that's strategically the use of hydrogen. Gasification. I've done a safety study, gasification plan. It is the biggest con the EU have ever imposed on this country. If you're going to burn waste, you burn it completely, you get thermodynamically more energy out of it, and it's a lot safer, and the capital cost is 1/3 of a gasification plant. The reason we gasify is some obscure German green was anti-incineration. So the EU have gone round their thing and said, oh, gasification will fund, we won't fund waste to energy. And that's why we've got gasification plants, because the EU, some numpty, refuses to confront the German green lobby saying incineration is bad. And that's the only reason. So we should, now we're out of the EU, we can actually be more fundamentally and say, actually, if you're going to burn waste, let's burn it properly, get rid of it, good abatement. And our incinerator Coventry produces less carbon emissions than Tim's diesel car in terms of balance. So yeah, so that's what we should do. So its content is going to be storage and use. Now, the other thing about hydrogen, it burns at a high temperature. That's very, very important for our industries in foundries. So that's where we ought to focus, actually, how we get into the foundries, into those industries. Acetylene's a hydrocarbon. You can use hydrogen instead of acetylene. A bit more hairy, but you can. It's also going to be used in the plasma industries and plasma cutting. So we need to think about for using our expertise in the region to look at plasma engineering and plasma impregnation. Because hydrogen can be used to impregnate metal to make it more resilient, which is a small molecule. You actually get into steel. So that's the way we ought to think. And one thing we've forgotten about hydrogen is oxygen. So when you split hydrogen, you make loads of oxygen. Now that oxygen should not be thrown into the atmosphere, because it can be used for waste treatment. It can be used for other uses, and that's the binary thing. So if you've got a plant that you need oxygen, you can make the oxygen, you can have the hydrogen as a byproduct, or vice versa. So you need to always think of the binary aspects of the equation. Hydrogen comes from H2O, but making hydrogen from gasification, we did it a century ago. It's a waste of time.
Okay, there you are. Next time you want to know something about it, forget who's. Okay, someone else is still on. It's Andy. Can you switch off? Next time you need to know anything, don't use consultants. Sly old council, contract out council. But I don't really want to comment on those. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting points there, but.
No, I would like to just say thank you actually for making those points, because it was decided the report wouldn't come from a chemistry point of view,
Yeah.
So it was more accessible. But we do have a chemist doctor in our team, and she would agree with you. I think the key point about storage is really important, and but it is also about the market. So the points you made about the EU, we're stuck in a market that doesn't recognise renewables obligation certificates and things from incineration and things. So we do have to balance the science with the market. But yeah, they're all very, very strong points, and I agree with you.
We would have talked to our biz to actually try and rebalance that market. But storage, don't forget, one thing I forgot to mention is grid balancing, because we could actually do grid balancing using hydrogen if we have to, by taking waste electricity.
Right, all noted. Majid next. Councillor Mahmood.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't profess to be an expert on hydrogen, so I really am grateful to the previous speaker for his in-depth knowledge of hydrogen. It's opened up a new avenues for me. From my point of view, City Council, we purchased 20 hydrogen buses as part of the wider project to test the creation of a hydrogen fuel market, and I'm sure we're willing to do more going forward. Where I am coming across a stumbling block is the cost, because we're in the middle of a procurement for new vehicles for refuse, and the cost of hydrogen vehicles is quadruple the cost of a diesel and more than twice the cost of a similar electric vehicle. So that is quite problematic going forward, because ideally we would want to be in a position where we can purchase the hydrogen buses, but economics is such that it's going to be difficult. In Tyseley, I know they produce hydrogen from water and electricity, but again, it's been touched upon. Electricity prices are so high, it does hinder the market greater in terms of the transport of that. And from what I understand, hydrogen for heat is still not developed sufficiently to transport pipes across the UK. So again, it loses too much through the pipe network. So I do think we do need to look at, as a combined authority, more cost-effective methods of producing the hydrogen. I've been advised that bioproducts of chemical process through off-sea generation, such as wind, is probably the best way forward. So if we've got any thoughts around that. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I mean, I think realistically, you know, the manufacturer is a real issue, and certainly my view is, you know, we are in the centre of England. We are the best place to invest for this type of exploration, and that's what our job is, really, to do that. You see, we're all saying the same thing, that really the tech's not there. And you know, the prospect of putting pipelines across, after what Andy's frightened me at death now about putting, and he's absolutely right. I mean, it is, you know, these things are very dangerous. I produced hydrogen on one occasion, I think, in my kitchen, but I also blew it up. So that lives in my memory. Peter.
The officer stated that wind turbines were the most efficient in terms of production of hydrogen. Was that correct?
So essentially, it's we're talking about utilising hydrogen to store excess renewable generation. The most amount of excess renewable generation we have is from our highest, the biggest size of generator is offshore wind turbines.
Moving on from that. Obviously, there's a reluctance to have onshore wind turbines, I believe, under the present administration. If that were to change, have we mapped out possible areas where wind turbines would be efficient? And if so, could we be given information on that?
It was done about 15 years ago. I believe, because the government actually paid for all regions to look at their renewable energy resources and identify where their opportunities were. You're right, under a different administration, onshore wind may be more acceptable. It's certainly the cheapest of the technologies. So yes, we could go back and have a look at those maps, but I think that is actually a role for the local authorities as well to consider in their spatial planning processes, whether the generation of renewable energy is something that they want to advocate through planning.
And I understand that Solihull have done a very recent exercise in mapping renewable energy generation potential across the whole of the borough.
It'd be good to have that information. Another question that I know this goes off on a tangent. Another question I put in the chat is
Before you go into that, I mean, I just want to comment because, and what you get is, I mean, actually, you can have the same discussion about housing. You can have the same discussion about, you know, panels. You know, the West Midlands has a lot of urban area and it has a lot of country area. And, you know, we just have to get the balance as to how we use all these things, because actually people also want the countryside. And it, you know, it's just tough how you balance all these. Anyway, press on, Peter.
Yeah. Can I ask what expertise in green technology is missing at the moment, which local colleges and universities should be aware of? In other words, what gaps are there that we need to fill in order to be up to speed for what's coming down the line? And that's not just limited to the hydrogen side of things. You know, where are the gaps, and should we be talking to the colleges and universities, as has been mentioned before, to try and sort of start now?
Maybe start on a specific hydrogen gap, and then maybe Terry, you can cover some of the wider kind of green economy issues. So one of the areas that the consultants identified as potentially a really exciting opportunity, given our advanced manufacturing base, is the manufacture of the electrolyzers themselves. Apparently, that's a real market gap at the moment, and is really holding back kind of nationally the program of rolling out kind of on-site hydrogen production. So that is one area that potentially could be looked at in terms of kind of opportunities for development further. But maybe Terry.
Anything I'd add to that is I was literally at an innovation event over the last couple of days talking about where the opportunities are and where the gaps are. I think there's recognition that there's money going into innovation at sort of PhD level, the real science of the green economy and the opportunities there. There's money going into sort of the boot camp. What's the market ready to deliver now, but maybe not in the middle. So there's a bit of a gap around making business cases, understanding those opportunities, and creating business and creating markets. So there's definitely something in the middle that's missing.
I think we've got back to that question, you know, earlier on about, you know, young people and bringing them in. And, you know, as somebody who was in business for a very long, for 30 years, actually, you know, I don't think you just train people up, you give them a job and pat them on the head and push ahead. What you're actually trying to do is develop strains of thinking and caliber and the rest of it. And each company has its own way of doing things. What it wants is people with the right attitude and interest to take on board. Now, we can go and lecture all we like in schools and colleges. I'm afraid to a great extent, I mean, I'm from the building industry, you know, who would want to go to the building industry? I tell you what, it's the most rewarding, wonderful industry you can ever imagine. It's packed full of tech, it's packed full of interest, but people won't necessarily know that. But you go to the apprenticeship show, as Andy and I did, and you'll see builders there demonstrating all that. They can do a far better job than we can if we can bring these people together, which is why I say some of these fairly basic things can really work, and I want to see them happen. And I've just mentioned to make sure we've got this log, because this is somewhere I want to revisit in other audiences. Right, moving, I'm sort of pushing us on ahead. I think it was, no, it wasn't. It was Suzanne next. Anyway, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. Not surprising you expect me to hit about the environment. And one of the things for me is around this whole conversation linking back to if you're generating it and you're generating for water, water is a very tight commodity now in the West Midlands. So again, that needs a broader conversation around the broader issues we've got about too much and too little water, particularly with the impact of climate change. We are seeing less water. We went through a drought last year, so those are going to have significant impacts. So that broader conversation does need to be had and linked into the locations.
Okay, I'm surprised if you actually use a lot of water to create hydrogen. I thought you know, one bit of water creates a hell of a lot of gas, but I stand to be corrected by all those people who know far much more in it. Are you going to correct me, Suzanne? Are you going to tell me?
I'm not a hydrogen generating expert, so I am not going to correct you on that. But I think you have to sort of look at it in the whole round. If you haven't got it and you're having your whole conversation about who do you provide? Drinking water through the tap, or it's a real issue. So again, that broader conversation of the environmental impacts of what you're proposing and how you're going to do it need to be there. Added to which, they will require permitting. I hate to keep going back to this, and those conversations early on are really useful.
Okay, no, point noted. Very, very important there. It's Rob next.
Yeah, very quick. Just relating back to the education and talk, somebody was talking about how we've got a gap of where the skills are. If you're focusing on maybe HNDs, or you're focusing on degrees, and then you're focusing on masters, and then you're focusing on PhDs, what we have to be aware is, if we're going to grow this sector within universities, I think everybody on this meeting should be aware that education, when you're looking at international students, they'll charge them about £12,000, where they'll charge a domestic student about £9,000. So there's a push for education then to pull in maybe more international students. The problem what we have, if we get a lot of international students, they go home, right? So if we do have that situation where we are getting a lot of international students coming in, we need to work with central government then on creating a visa stimulant. So I know the extension now for international students coming in, if they do study here, they can get like a 2-year visa or something. If we can push them with central government, then that if we're having somebody on an energy efficiency course related to what we're discussing here, that they can maybe extend that course to that period of stay visa for about a 5-year period. Okay, something so where they can get in and prove themselves. Okay.
Yeah, got that. Thank you. Okay, I'm not sure anyone else is registered, so I think we've probably done that subject, unless you want to come back. But I thought it was fascinating, and look forward to moving ahead. So, right, next on the moving forward is these are items for update, so they're hopefully going to be short. And I'm going to zip through them. First of all, Commonwealth Games Legacy Community Environmental Fund, which is Richard.
Thanks, Councillor. I don't have slides, so I'm just going to talk briefly through the paper that's in the agenda pack. So it starts on page 21. The paper details the proposals for a new community environment fund, which builds on the success of the WMCA's existing community green grants that was discussed at the board recently, and the board is asked to agree the purpose and the remit of that fund that I'll cover now. So the background to this is referenced under 2.1. that the WMCA board has agreed that the WMCA is the accountable body for up to £70 million of unallocated funding from the Commonwealth Games. And the funding is being split into 4 pillars, and the Community Environment Fund would sit in the Wellbeing and Sustainability pillar. And the proposal is for a Community Environment Fund programme totaling £1.2 million to be delivered by March 2025. Bringing in or supporting communities across the West Midlands to improve their local environments, but also helping them enhance health and well-being and other outcomes. So as I say, we're looking to build on our existing community green grants programme that's detailed within the paper. And so far we've spent about £350,000 through that grant, supporting access to green space. We've taken on board feedback through that grant, but also the projects that we haven't been able to fund because of the remit of the grant. And we're looking to broaden the scope of the Community Environment Fund, looking at the sustainability themes of the Commonwealth Games. So the overarching themes that we're proposing for the new fund are natural environment, so projects that would help to protect, restore and enhance nature and wildlife. Circular economy projects, looking at how we reduce waste and keep resources and materials in use for as long as possible. Climate adaptation, so how do we support communities to be more resilient and more prepared for the impacts of climate change. Retaining the access to green space that's currently in the Green Grants programme. And then environmental awareness as well, something that's really important around supporting behaviour change, but raising awareness of environmental issues. The appendix that's supported in or included in the paper gives a bit more insight on what sort of projects would be looking to fall under those overarching themes. And in terms of grant sizes, we're keeping that similar to the current community green grants. So we're thinking up to 25 grand for small projects, and then about 100k for larger projects. In terms of the number of grants, we're thinking 5 to 7 for the large and around 20 for the small, depending on, of course, how big the applications are when they come in. In terms of delivery of the programme, there are 3 key points to make, really. So the first one is around the number of staff. So we're proposing that there be 2 staff members. So we retain the existing officer role that we've got for the community green grants to support with awareness and helping communities with their application process, but then also bring in a community environment fund manager to reflect the breadth of the programme that we're proposing and ensure that we have real delivery focused approach, but also attract private sector funding as well. So we don't just want to deliver a 1.2 million programme and stop there. We want to be able to grow this funding opportunity. So a fund manager would be able to bring in private sector funding, but also follow on grants so that there's ongoing legacy for years to come as well. So the second point is around the grant administrator support role, which has worked really well for us in the community green grants. So we'd look to retain that as well. And then finally, we want to make sure that we've got the right support for communities because it's not an easy process to go through. Sometimes we want to make sure we're giving them the best opportunity for a successful application, as well as having a really strong grant assessment panel with experts that can help us make sure we're providing best value for money, but also the right projects going through as well. So next steps are for the whole of this Commonwealth Games Legacy Fund approach to be approved by the WMTA board, as well as individual cases, business cases such as this one, to go through the investment board. So that's the paper in brief, and I'll pause for comments from the board to be able to feed into the finalisation of the Community Environment Fund. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I'll hand over to, I better hand over quickly because when I look at on page 22 what Solihull's got, one grant, I'm sure Councillor Macbeth is going to take that back and tell a few people, but it looks really important. I'm not sure who was first, Majid first of all.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm broadly supportive of the new remit of this. I'm pleased to see that there has been 30 applications received from Birmingham, but only 5 have been approved. That's around 20%, which isn't quite high. I think that needs to be revisited. Now we've got some more expertise coming on board. Surely that's something that he or she could take on and speak to the relevant people who have put in the application. I also think it's important that we try to, and the officer touched upon this, is match fund these applications. Someone's bid for some money from this grant that will put them in a good position to get some match funding from alternative routes. And then finally, if we could have email sent of the application process, and the reason I'm asking is because as a council, we give a grant of, I think it's about £30,000 we've given to Birmingham Open Spaces Forum, and that's for them to support friends groups around our parks on projects to help them apply for funding. So if I could have that link, I could forward it to them, and that will bring in even more applications from Birmingham. Thank you.
I think you haven't done that badly, Birmingham, but there we go. We all want to do better. Okay, noticed about that link, Peter.
By no means do I want to come across as though I'm objecting to the sentiments and suggestions in this report, but am I right in thinking that the board hasn't yet agreed the methodology for the distribution of the Commonwealth Games Legacy Fund yet? My understanding was there was still some decisions to be made on that, and in taking the recommendations of this report, are we prejudging what the board might decide afterwards? I don't think there's full agreement on the pillars, for instance.
Ed?
So let's be clear what there has been agreement to and what is yet to come, because you're quite right to say, Councillor, that there's more decisions to be taken initially this Friday and then subsequently on the 17th of March board. But the one thing that is 100% clear and that has been decided on by the Combined Authority board is the allocations to the 4 different pillars. So the pillars themselves were, the amounts allocated to each of those were agreed. However, within each pillar, there are delivery programs, and those delivery programs are going to be agreed at the next board meeting. So there won't be changes between pillars, but there may be discussions to be had within the different pillars. And that will be the subject of an initial discussion on Friday and then a decision at the board meeting on the 17th of March. This particular programme that Richard's described sits within the wellbeing and sustainability pillar. There is £4 million allocated to that pillar, and this proposal is for 1 million, 1.2 million of it. So there may be a conversation to be had at the meeting on Friday and then subsequently the board about whether the relative balance within the pillar is appropriate. But to date, nobody has flagged this as being a particular problem, and I think most people are supportive of that. The purpose of bringing it to this meeting and for this conversation is so that Councillor Courts, as the leader, portfolio holder, has a sense in which you all as board members are supportive of this particular programme, so that if there is a debate on Friday or subsequently, Councillor Courts will be able to speak to your views on this matter. So we're not a decision-making forum here. We're not deciding on anything to do with that fund right now. But if we are supportive of the proposal that Richard has outlined, then Councillor Courts can make that very clear at the meeting on Friday.
Okay.
Okay, which is an open invitation to say, is everybody happy with this paper? Because I'm going to ask it. It may not be a decision making, but if there's anybody who doesn't support this, I'd like to know.
Could I abstain on the basis of not being? I haven't been given a steer on this, so I'm not saying yes and I'm not saying no. So can I abstain, please, at this stage?
It's not a decision making. It's taking the. Don't worry, Peter. It's not so in that way. It's just getting the sense of the board. I mean, there's going to be other things to discuss about the legacy funding. I mean, to my mind, I can't think of anything better than the local community projects to fit into what were the legacy of the Commonwealth Games, which was built on, health and well-being and participation in communities. But there we are.
I fully agree, Councillor Courts. I fully agree with those sentiments. I'm not saying that, but I think. Sorry.
It's fine, Peter. I know your position. You don't. It's fine. I know where you're coming from.
I think I'd rather abstain at this point, and I'm sorry that I'm in that position, but that's what I'd like to say at this point. Okay. Thank you.
Andy, we're going to have to move more quickly. We've got 3
Yeah,
minutes.
I've got to go and catch a train, I'm afraid. We've got another meeting, so I forgot it was 11 o'clock start. But quickly, yeah, in Solihull, we would do better on applying. The key thing, some research has come through about what helps people live longer. And it's not, people look, it was a long study, 50 years, but it goes contrary view. It's not depravity, it's not poverty, it's actually happiness. If you're happier, you do. So these green spaces will actually help increase people's well-being and maybe cut the gap if we produce green space where people can feel better with. That's what determines your length of your life, is happiness more than anything else. I'll end on that. So
Yeah, we're all for happiness.
Yeah.
I mean, no, you're absolutely right. He's just exemplified what I was trying to say earlier on. Okay, no other speakers. So, I mean, the actual recommended is to agree the purpose of our bit. Peter reserves his position, but no one else has objected. So, I'm going to move on. Thanks for the discussion. Good. Oh, hang on a bit. You put your hand up.
Yeah, I had it up before. I just want to say I think this is going in the right direction, and I think we just need a little bit on the distribution, how it's going to get distributed out, and the link would be important for us to get into, and that's it. But I think it's going in the right direction.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for that assurance. Okay, great stuff. We'll move on to West Midlands Forest Partnership, and I have a feeling Mike Webb's going to say he's just appeared on the screen with his pond in his back garden. behind him. So over to you, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Courts. I've got a very short presentation, but I promise you it will be very, very quick. So I'll just share my screen now. If you could tell me when things are looking good.
I can see it.
Right, brilliant. Okay, so this is really just giving an update, an overview of the Emergency Tree Fund. It's been a while coming through. We first applied for this back in 2021, and we've only just had contracts signed and sealed back in January this year. So very welcome that we've got it, and just like to run through what it's all about. So if I can get that to shift. Yeah. So the Emergency Tree Fund is a national fund of about £3 million administered via the Woodland Trust. So the Woodland Trust is a conservation charity. We've got a £300,000 share of that fund, and principally it's split into two main areas. One is to deliver what we call an iTree survey of Birmingham, Solihull and Coventry, and the reason it's those three authorities is that the Black Country has already been covered by a similar survey. So in essence, what we're looking to do is to fill that full data gap for the whole of the region, and that will give us a really comprehensive report on the stock and the health and the contributions that the trees canopy cover are giving us in terms of financial contributions and worth for well-being, water attenuation, air quality, carbon sequestration, and it puts us in a position where we can talk about that tree stock in a much more informed way, and how we can plan ahead in terms of looking after it, replacing it, because trees don't live forever, but also identifying the potential for future planting across the region, where the priorities are and where that links in with some of our other adaptation work, climate adaptation work. Alongside that, we'll be setting up a regional forest partnership, and that's for a 2-year period. And that's really to galvanise people into action, to looking at tree planting opportunities, and also not being limited to just a single scheme for planting trees. So what we are looking to do is to bring all the different options together, because different land holdings and different landowners will have different priorities. So we'll be looking to give people clear information so they can act on what's best for them, and through that we should deliver more tree planting on the ground, and that will obviously align with other initiatives going on, like the local nature recovery strategy too. So it's quite an interesting and exciting time. We'll also be looking at delivering a landowners forum, just to get landowners involved, and some behaviour change work in association with that. So we're already working with the Woodland Trust on one of their offers at the moment for tree planting. One of their schemes they run is they provide 75% financial support for the supply of trees and materials for planting. So that's a fairly generous scheme, and there are a number of criteria for that. But what we've set about doing is producing an offer to the constituent authorities of 1,000 trees, and we will be topping that up, so they are free trees and they can sample the service and get to understand what the Woodland Trust can offer through the More Tree scheme. And that could be on authority land, or it could be that the authorities push that out to maybe some worthy community groups as well. So that's something we'll be talking to your officers about in the next couple of weeks, to get an order in for 1,000 trees, which will be free to them, and get those sites identified and in the process for the next planting season. So in terms of where we are with our activities in this area, so we've already interviewed and we've appointed a forest partnership coordinator, so they will be starting in April this year. We're currently going through the procurement process for the iTree survey. It's a pretty substantial survey. We're looking at costs of round about £170,000 plus. So it's a big old survey, and we need to go through that process in the next month or so for a start for surveys in the summer season. And we've got ongoing discussions with the Woodland Trust on engagement and delivery of their tree planting scheme, but we will be talking to others regarding this. And then just in terms of other stuff that is in the mix, we're doing a lot more than just the ETF project. We're currently looking at a tree nursery study and business case. So actually looking at whether there's enough supply for the demands that are coming through for tree planting across the region and how we can take that forward. So I think that's a really important piece of trying to create these woodland areas. We've got the virtual forest, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. It's been in place a couple of years now. So what we are doing is we're looking at data input into that to make that more efficient and bring more stakeholders to the place where they can actually input data very easily. We've been talking to the Midlands Forest Network, and Councillor Court, you'll recall, he spoke at the launch of that late last year. So we've given a letter of support from the Mayor to that, but through that process, we've negotiated ourselves a place at the table to talk around urban tree issues and to actually use the ETF project as a little bit of a test bed for how the Midlands Forest Network could operate and use some initiative going forward and be innovative. And then finally, just hot off the press, the last couple of weeks, Natural England have produced green infrastructure standards for adoption by councils, and it's more of an advisory set of guidelines for adoption in the planning process. But within those guidelines, there are 5 standards. The final of those 5 standards relates to canopy increase with regard to trees, and those canopy increase targets will be set by local authorities. So a lot of the work we're doing with the iTree survey will really help those constituent authorities deliver on that requirement going forwards. So that's it from me. So happy to take some questions.
Yeah, I'm just puzzled. I mean, I've been working with Woodland Trust for a long time, for years now. I'm just wondering what is different about what's being proposed. I mean, how will is this going to add something to what we're doing, or is it for anyone who isn't working with the Woodland Trust?
Yeah, so in essence, this is the second round of the emergency tree fund. So the Woodland Trust has been very successful at getting corporate money in. So the first scheme was through Lloyds Bank, and this scheme is funded through Amazon, the online shopping company. So it's a mechanism for them to distribute local level action through local authorities and combined authorities. So it's another way of them delivering on the ground with big grants coming through those corporate bodies.
Okay, right, moving to speakers. I think Majid was first, but we've got 10 minutes left, and we've got 2 more items. So can you be brief, please?
Yeah, I'll be brief. Yeah, I know officers in council have been helping with the fund, with the application and the funding process around this. We're very supportive in the city. I have an ambition of having 1.14 million public trees, which is equivalent to the populations. I've still got another 350,000 to go, so I will greatly receive any trees that are coming my way. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Good stuff. Great contribution. Rob?
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of this, and I think it's great. And I want more trees and more trees. The one thing I would say, we have a problem in Dudley with tree vandalisation. So we've planted a lot of trees, and because they're a small girth, right, kids are snapping the damn things off. Is there any way that we can have slightly more mature trees that can't actually be broken? Because we go into all this effort of putting trees in, and then within the space of about 3 months, especially during the winter times, vandals are just taking reaping their revenge on them. So if we can have something that they can't actually break off with their own hands, that would be beneficial, and something for you guys to be aware of when you're distributing small girth trees.
No,
I
thanks, thank you, Rob.
But I've had this issue. I mean, I was on site last week, and you know what I mean, it is young people, kids tend to do that. I mean, whether they think it funny or not. The problem is even bigger girth trees will also, you know, present more of a challenge. There isn't an easy answer from this. Why parents are allowing their children to do this sort of thing, because that's, I'm afraid, what it is in many cases. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. I mean, I've got a tree, you know, we've got doing 25,000 a year. You know, I go out there and I see, you know, a large scale, these things being destroyed. It's just heartbreaking for the people that are doing it. And who knows what the answer is, but there may be several. But okay, that's but okay. Thanks very much, Mike. I'm going to move on now to Ed. Switch myself off. Ed, on update on Trailblazer DD.
Forgive me, councillor, because there was one more person on on trees. Yeah, I think.
Rob, did I miss somebody? Rob?
Oh no, sorry, that's an old hand.
He's an old hand.
So on Trailblazer on Trailblazer Devolution deal, we are at the very final stage now of trying to conclude a deal. Once again, there will be a discussion at the Mayor and Portfolio Leaders meeting on Friday with a status update, with the view then to trying to approve a deal the following Friday. We'd hoped it could have been brought forward, but the government has not been supplying us with the text in good time, so that we've had to nudge things back in that way. In relation to the particular chapter as it's described around net zero, there will be, I think, important steps forward in a number of respects. I'll just list them very quickly. In relation to local area energy planning, there will be commitments to a closer relationship with Ofgem in particular, and general support for the local area energy planning approach that we're suggesting, although not funding to do it. In relation to industrial decarbonisation, there will be funding for business support, and if we are lucky, we're hoping to also have some capital funding to support businesses with that transition as well. In relation to natural environment, we are hoping they will agree to funding a new investment fund that will support our work on getting private investment into natural environment projects. In relation to climate adaptation, we're hoping there will be a commitment to working with us on climate adaptation. We're hoping that goes a step further and that we become a pathfinder for climate adaptation. And on air quality, we are there will be a commitment for government to be working on the regional air quality work, the framework that we're already working on, again potentially with funding attached to that as well. The big issue that I haven't mentioned is obviously retrofit. We have made a very strong case for a single fund to amalgamate all the different competitive bidding funds that we have to go for at the moment. We know that the department is very resistant to that for a range of different reasons. However, I understand that interventions are being made at a very high level even today to try and unlock that for us. The likelihood is that it will only be a commitment to pull retrofit funding in the next spending review period, not in this spending review period. And so we have also got proposals as to incentives that they could create for us in this spending review period as well. But it's the retrofit piece, which at the moment is going to go right down to the wire as to whether we get anything like what we want through that. So that's just a very brief update.
And that's the point about consistency of funding and policy over a longer term to deal with encouraging business to invest in its assets and supply chain. Okay, so well, there are some good stuff there, and I mean, I'll sort of think back when we started this discussion, Ed. I don't think climate change was particularly on as a major heading. It wasn't. Well, I know it wasn't, because I think I said something at the time, and what I think we've successfully done is to actually not only put it there, but put it there with a number of items and big time. So well done to the team on doing that. That's really good. Okay, right. I'm going to move on, and we're almost on time, depending on how many things Jackie got to talk about on funding updates. I rather wanted to talk forever because it will mean she's got more money that she's secured, but perhaps that won't be the case. Jackie.
Thank you. It's just a really quick update. So you've heard about some of the things that are pending around the Community Environment Fund, potentially some funding to support private investment into natural capital. But one thing that we have definitely secured is DEFRA Air Quality Grant funding of just under £1 million to support the work we're doing on air quality. And that will enable us to install some additional air quality monitors, particularly that will measure PM 2.5 across the region, will enable us to set up a website so we're able to see live data rather than the model data that we currently have available through work that the WMAir project at Birmingham University has provided for the region. But we'll also be able to run a number of awareness and behaviour change campaigns, particularly linked to PM 2.5 in each of the local authorities. So that project will be up and running as soon as possible after April and is a 2-year programme. We'll bring an air quality update probably to the next Environment and Energy Board meeting that will provide an overview of the air quality framework that we promised to take back to the Combined Authority Board, as well as progress on the grant and the direction of travel around that. So it was just to let you know about that.
Yeah, and I sort of I met with Therese Coffey actually at the University of Birmingham. I was quite staggered by what the university is doing there in terms of monitoring air quality, and what wonderful work is going on in this region. I do think one of the things I keep stressing, I mean, you mentioned behaviour change. One of the things I keep stressing is I don't particularly care for the words net zero action of itself, because I think we're often missing the point and missing the audience, whereas the multiple benefits of taking action on climate change, there's a lot, and air quality is one, the excess deaths in certainly the West Midlands, but also the cleaner environment to live and health and all that. And I think it's a real plus point from climate change. And I think if we're looking at media, as we've referred to, I really do think this is a message we need to get out. It's the benefits of taking this action. It's not just about hair shirts. Indeed, air quality is very much about changing the environment in which we live for the better, isn't it? Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. And I think we've more or less finished. I mean, there isn't a thing for AOB, but obviously, if anyone had anything else to say, they could. But I just want to thank everybody for their contribution. It's been a very rich discussion on a number of points today. And, thank you for your time, and look forward to, the next skirmish, wherever it might be. It won't be a skirmish, will it? It'll be an enjoyable discussion. So thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.